Okay, now I mentioned to you that I love horror films. Um, and when I saw the description of this and that gorgeous graphic poster and the really amazing photographs that you utilized, I said, this is one to see. But when I say horror films, obviously it gets stereotyped and everyone just says, oh, well, that's nice. Someone's head's gonna roll. Okay, I'm starting, Abigail, I'm starting with you, and then I want to hear from everyone at Alia. Uh, Tell me about the play. Tell me about this amazing work.
Yes, so it is a show about a group of young women, young girls, and near the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina, who, following a violent death of the main protagonist's father, sort of create their own savior, create their own religion that they begin to worship, with the hope of ultimately bringing this father back from the dead. And so they, there's lots of blood, there's lots of dancing, there's love, there's everything that you could possibly want in a dramatic piece. And the horror elements are primarily concerned with grief. I've always thought that horror as a genre is the genre that captures the like reality and the just horribleness of grief the best, in the sense of like there are a lot of things that happen when you're grieving, especially a loved one, that like maybe imagining them out of the corner of your eye, or remembering their voice at times, or feeling like maybe you hear them or they're in the room with you, that are these horror tropes but are incredibly normal for people to experience when they're grieving a loved one. So I really wanted to use horror as a genre to explore grief and all of its nitty-grittiness, its intricacies, its weirdness. And yeah, that was the main inspiration.
And you know
So,
what what you were talking, Abigail, it also made me think of like I feel like horror usually is for film and like the idea of like seeing them out of the corner of your eye. Like in film, you can do that so easy. In theater, like you can just have a person sort of hover ghostly, you know what I mean? And then kind of take them away. Like theater, it's all so then you have to really make choices about what you're seeing, what you're not seeing, and the ways in which that translates to the audience.
Which is one of the main reasons that I think we were interested in the show, is how much it's challenging this idea of what horror is, where it belongs, and how can we bring it to the theater, and how new this feels, and also how just in time it feels. It feels right for the current times that we're living.
I think challenging is right because I feel like half of the stage directions were like,
Yeah.
how are we gonna do
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
And then time breaks into 10,000 pieces. Okay.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And little behind the scenes, we were just rehearsing today one of our fight choreographies, because there's fight choreography in the show, and it's really just trying to get the juice out of those moments. It's so exciting to like finally see it taking shape, and we're super excited to have people.
Yeah, something to like horror and theater as well as the fact that obviously the audience is there, right? So like there is an element to like inviting the audience to be part of like this ritual that they like start developing, the characters start developing that, can take the horrorness to a different level. So yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah, I will add to that that as we were rehearsing today, one has to one has to, if you're dying, you are dying on your own, right? Like you are the actor and you're dying. There's no like effects, there's no cutting here, redoing there. So it's like another level of commitment. And I really hope that the audience's energy is gonna kind of like really fuel that stylistic choice that we make.
that's an interesting question that you're saying there. And in terms of horror, I always read these stories about in film. It's something's a green screen, so they say, okay, look over there. There's a giant. Oh, and you got to act it through, but you don't have that. You don't have the green screen where you are here. How I ask all of you, how did you tap into the horror of this? Because it sounds otherworldly. It's not like you're talking about a disease that you can research. This is otherworldly. How did you tap into that? How did you create your role and create the circumstances? You die on stage. How'd you do it? What did you think happened?
Spoiler alert. um,
I think it really helps that the four of us are the ones kind of rotating on stage, and the four of us have been acting together and working together for 6 years. So in like a weird way, we have like our own little rituals within our friendship, you know, within like with the way that we know each other, and we have known each other for so long that we know each and every movement. We know where the expression comes from. And I think that that kind of like community, because I think that the horror in this play is very much based on like a need for salvation through somebody else, right? Like somebody else that you can cling on to and you can love, and that gives you hope. So I think that that was a good starting point.
Yeah, I think yes, there is something otherworldly about it, but at the same time, Abigail's writing is so good because it actually is very believable. You know, she really takes the characters into a journey of discovering that. And because their circumstances are so extreme, it actually is something that could happen in our world. It's just a really like extreme segment of this world, but
And
it exists in this our reality. Yeah.
yeah, and to jump off of that, like the writing does so much to ground us in reality, the reality of this immense grief, that then when the otherworldly comes in, it feels like really a hit. We're not there from the beginning. We're like going through this journey with the characters, and so when we arrive there, we know why we're there. We know why this is happening. We're following along. It's not just like, wait, what? Where did this come from? It's definitely also grounded in the reality of these characters' situation. Yeah.
And it really helps. Now you've been around for 6 years. I remember working with you a few years ago, and you're still 6 years in theater language is about 100 years in normal. So bravo for still being here. Now, you say you've been working together so closely that literally you feel each other, for lack of a better term. But you're playing you're rotating, so you're each playing each role. Am I right?
Not all of them.
No.
We have two actors playing two roles, one as an understudy and but more, it's very interesting. I think the richest part of that is how complex and new the relationships can be and how deep our relationships are. It's not like it's not fake, you know, that we're longtime friends. It's not fake that there's synergy between us, and that I think is the most powerful thing that we bring as an ensemble company, is carrying that truthfulness with us. And that is kind of, yeah, where we thrive. And then there are all these exciting elements around it. But and then we're just like attaching so many elements to it, and that's the challenging part too. But we're grounded by that. Yeah.
You might be grounded, but the whole thing is up in the air, because it's amazing, because every performance is going to be different. You have another voice, another interpretation. Now, while yes, okay, there's the through line, there's another interpretation all over the place. So when a line is thrown at you, you can't even have that muscle memory. Oh, okay, they're going to ask me what? It's the delivery. It's amazing. Abigail, how is that for you? You're sitting there watching it, and then okay, switch roles, and then it's another play. How do you feel watching your play done this way, that way, this way, that way? How does it feel?
It's been really fascinating. It's been also so helpful, and so interesting to kind of learn, like, I don't know. I mean, because this show has been done, this is the first ever production of the show. This is the world premiere, but it has had 2 staged readings before, once in 2023, and then actually another in 2023. So it's been a while since both. But those were also completely different casts both times. So this is now like the 3rd and 4th casts that have ever read these roles. And so seeing kind of what works and what as the through line of like, yes, this line is great, or maybe, or actually I need to alter some things because all of these actors are having trouble with this thing, let's alter it. That's been very helpful. But also it gives me just a fuller picture of the characters, because when you have so many different you know, a human person is so complex and has so many different facets and so many different versions. You know, we always talk about like who you are with your mother is different than who you are with your, you know, your, I don't know, your neighbor or whatever, you're these different people. And so taking like every actor's version of a character helps me combine them all into this character becomes more and more of a person to me.
And I also just want to like commend Abigail for like she's been in rehearsal almost this whole time with us. And just as we like do table work and go through the script and like the directors and us are kind of like bouncing off of each other of like, oh, I think this part can be this and then this is connected to that. And she's just sitting there like, and you know, like as in like just really letting us, she's not like, no, no, I did not intend this to be like that, right? Like she's really letting us find new meaning in her work without being like, no, that's not how I intended it, or that's how I intended it more. And I think like her input is always so helpful because we're like, oh, but
Yes.
it's her like it's never, it doesn't feel like pressure, like, no, you actually need to do it like this because we're so different, because like, each of us, like when we read the scene, is just a different scene, like you said, Jay. But also, I think like just want to commend Abigail for like letting her writing transform with these casts and with this whole production.
Yeah, and also just being such a like contributing so much to our table work at the same time, because the depth to which Abigail thought of for these characters is really fascinating. Like there's so much, not just in the characters, like she created a wonderful dramaturgy packet for us that like has been amazing. But also just the symbols of the play, everything is, all the references, they're all like, she went so deep in her process, and yeah, she is a genius to be discovered.
We're glad, yeah, we're glad that we caught her now, because in a year or two, she will not be reachable.
You're all very, very sweet. I'll just say also, I always say, you know, in terms of like when someone has an idea about how to say a line or does something maybe different than I intended, it's like I think actors are so brilliant and so smart and will have so many fantastic and wonderful ideas. Like that's one of my favorite things is changing stuff depending on an actor. Like I am very much willing to kill my darlings. I try very hard not to have an ego about things. And so it's like if you know, I've found time and time again, like, oh, I thought the scene was going to go this way, and then these creative people come in and take it in this direction, and it's infinitely better and infinitely more exciting than I had anticipated. And I think all of theater, I mean, art in general, but especially theater, is all about collaboration, and it's only like through collaboration that I think one of my plays can ever actually become finished.
I agree with you in terms of that. I think successful companies are the ones that start with the camaraderie, start with the community, start with the collaboration. Especially in this case, my goodness, we have all these interpretations happening, and there's the author sitting there. What's to stop the author from saying, "Don't do that"? But you don't. You're all working toward it. It's like you're all psychically linked somehow to this. And now you had mentioned before, you said that you know each other so well that you just kind of second guess each other and you know where everything's going. That's not so much a trope of horror films. That's a trope of comedy. You know, you get these comedy teams. An old story about the Marx Brothers. W.C. Fields said he will never perform on the same stage as the Marx Brothers because you just can't top them. Because they, as brothers, they just had this psychic link when they performed. Comedy. Shakespeare purposely put comedic characters in all of his tragedies because you got to have that moment to exhale, or your audience is going to have a nervous breakdown at the end. That's why there's the gravedigger, the porter. That's why there's the nurse, and all of these. Comedy in this? Is there comedy? Is there things to laugh at? Gallows humor?
Oh
Even?
yeah. Yeah.
I think so, definitely. I remember writing it and sort of chuckling to myself. And then it was so exciting to you know, during our first table read, to read things out loud and for people to laugh and to know, oh my gosh, okay, things are landing. People have a similar sense of humor to me. But also to see, I mean, there are lines that I didn't intend as comedic. I'm just thinking of something that happened in rehearsal yesterday where then they were performed and it made it like brought a laugh out from within me I didn't even know was coming because it was just, oh, this is so funny and new. I think teenage girls are hilarious. They're so honest and can be so evil. And when I, you know, interact with them in my life. Not that I do very often, but they make me laugh. And I think that it's like a very, yeah, and I think you need to be able to exhale. I also think both comedy and horror are, you could say, like methods of catharsis. You know, you're releasing something when you're experiencing this. And I always think that when I hear an audience member like gasp, or when I hear an audience member laugh, I feel the same sort of, I've done what I've come to do, and this was my goal, and I've achieved it.
You know, it's so funny. Abigail was kind enough to like run lines with all of us. And so every time she like reads the other character and she's like, this is my favorite line in the play. And then we'll be listening to her and be like, this is my other favorite line in the play. She's so funny.
Yeah.
I
But
crack myself up.
Good.
I do think
Self-sufficient.
that to add on to that, like I think teenage girls are actually hilarious. Even in their seriousness,
Well-
they carry such an awkwardness and also such a like weird vulgarity that doesn't sit right in their voice and their bodies just yet. So, and I think that the dialogue is written so well that like we've all been teenagers before. We know what that's like. And so, and I think that also because we work so much together, we know how to pick up, like, we also know how to get at each other, you know? And I think that shows.
Yeah, I was gonna say that it's because they take themselves so seriously that like it's funny. That like you don't, oh, this is just, you don't need to,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be so worked up about this. It's okay.
Yeah.
But you know, teenage girls
Yeah.
like everything is a tragedy, everything is drama.
Yeah.
And so it's hilarious.
Yeah.
And I wanted to like kind of just go back to what you were saying, Jay, about like the moments of exhale and how I always think about things in contrast with each other, and like what we were talking about earlier of like the moments, the otherworldly moments work because the play is so grounded. Same thing here. I think like the horror moments and the dramatic moments work because there's comedy. And so how things land so much better when there's contrast. And she does that so well, like in between, like inside every scene, but also as an arc.
Yeah, something else I was gonna say, because Abigail was saying, "Oh, I love teenage girls. They're so funny because they're so honest, but at the same time, they're also very dishonest in this play. Like they're moments of like honest in the sense of like they just say what they're thinking, but very often they say the opposite of the truth.
Yeah.
And as an audience member, you can like track some of these lies, and it's just so funny how they just like
They lie so
all the
quick.
time.
Just
Like
liars.
they just say things and you're like, wait, that was obviously a lie.
But I feel like that is the truth of the moment for them. That like in order to get through this moment, they need to lie. And that's their truth, is that like, well, how am I gonna get out of this? Clearly, I need to lie. And so that is their truth in that moment, I feel.
Yeah, I think the most powerful thing about the play and all the elements of horror, comedy, and lying and teenage girls is really how truthful it is, and how, and I think that's what's fascinating, because it's how truthful this extremely bonkers universe that we're living in. Sorry, I couldn't find a better word for that, but it's just insane. It's batshit crazy, but because it's so true, it's so real, we are in, and that's the hardest thing to do. So I think that's the coolest part of the play,
And to like go off of that of like the it being such a crazy world. And yet when someone that we love dies, we're very much expected to like, you know, people are like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. And then like a week later, like, okay, you need to go back to work or you need to go back to school, and like integrating, like no one kind of makes the space besides your friend, you know, like in a professional setting, in a school setting, whatever, people rarely make spaces for you to be able to feel that grief through and like work through it as you're working through other things. Like people will show sympathy, and like I think, you know, like there's a lot of, and even in the play, right, there's a lot of love and care for this main character who's lost a loved one. But I do think that in general, you know, when we're, let's say we're at work and then something like this happens, and then people are like, oh yeah, I get it, you know, yeah, take the week off. And then when you're back, it's supposed to be back to work, and it's just, that's not how grief works. And the way our society is structured is that like we cannot afford to have those containers, because everything then crumbles. And like we as people need those containers to feel that grief, to go through it. And I think this play in a lot of ways is like pushing back on that, is like, what happens if I'm not functional after this for a longer time? Yeah.
Do you think I had a bevy of questions, but I'll ask them later. You said something very fascinating, that we don't have time to grieve, that we have to go back to life. Do you think that's the reason? And there's such it's such a famous thing. It's said to be the most profitable genre in terms of film, is the horror genre. And even in theater, it has a rich historical reference. Do you think it's around because we've never had time to grieve and we allow it to just churn in our head, and the loss of a loved one suddenly creates hell and demons and everything else because we simply can't take the time to cry?
I mean, I think that could be an element of it, I think like back to I'd always sort of liked horror, but I didn't become a real horror movie lover until during the pandemic. Two of my grandparents died and both of my dogs died in like very
I'm
quick
so sorry.
succession. Yeah, which was just really awful. And I was surrounded also by like, personal death and personal loss. And then you open up your phone and you see, death counts, climbing from different wars, from the pandemic, from this, that, and the other. And, majority of my family are healthcare workers, and it was just surrounding me. And I watched Midsommar by Ari Aster, which is so much about, horror after grief. The main character loses both of her parents and her sister in one night. And I remember watching this and like weeping, and and like impacting my brain so much. And around that same time, I read Hamlet, and I had read Hamlet maybe 5 times beforehand. I had, read it in high school, read it in, in all sorts of classes. I went to a liberal arts college, so I was always reading Hamlet, but I didn't really ever feel it until then. And I read this play, and I remember also like being so heavily impacted by his loss of his father. And I was writing a paper on the role of the ghost, and ended up stumbling upon this like Swedish study that said that they interviewed people who had lost immediate loved ones, so like grandparents, parents, a romantic partner, a child, a sibling, and found that of the people interviewed, a huge majority experienced visual or auditory hallucinations of that person in the few weeks after their death. But a vast majority of those people who experienced that were completely unwilling to talk to people about it because they were, nervous of that being seen as like quote unquote crazy. And I thought that was so interesting, and to look at Hamlet through this lens, to look at different horror movies through this lens. So many horror movies start with the main character losing a loved one. That is so common. And I think that grief is so otherworldly and takes you out of your body and your life in such a real way that sometimes the only way to process it can be through these, yeah, these otherworldly stories. So I think that it totally ties into it all.
It's funny you say
And
about Hamlet, because there's the line where he says, and I'm misquoting it, a guilty creature sitting at a play suddenly gets the tug of conscience. So yes, as we see we don't know it in ourselves, but when we see someone else,
Absolutely.
it's back here for us.
Yeah. It's like in your spine, and you'll see it, and maybe you don't even know why you're weeping watching this movie, why you have these vivid nightmares afterwards, why you're thinking about it all day, but your body knows, your core knows. And I think that horror can get right down to your core in the same way grief does, and that they can live together in a really interesting way.
Hmm.
And I
Um,
want to say that another trope of like horror films is, because like you said, it starts with someone losing a loved one, and then another like a big one is like people not believing when stuff is happening. It's like, oh no, you're just or you're just, And I think no wonder so many people don't want to talk about their experiences, because like clearly they've had proof, or like they've seen it on in the media, that like, oh yeah, I can't talk about it because I'm not going to be taken seriously, or I'm not going to get what I need. And I wanted to add to what Abigail was saying of like, Abigail, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you shared this with us at some point of like, that you started writing this play and you thought that it's completely divorced from your experience of loss, and then like you're like, oh yeah, I'm just writing these characters, and then at some point it kind of hit you that like, hold on, I'm what I'm going through with the writing.
Absolutely. And throughout this process, it has been, there have been even more revelations. Like I think I had already, had sort of accepted, okay, at first it was like, oh, I'm writing this thing that's purely fiction. And then I showed it to my mom and she was like, this reminds me of so-and-so relative and this experience I told you about, or this thing that we went through, and being like, oh, wow, okay, this is more of a connection. And then now during this process of like having a full production, and I'll just say our director is incredible. She has really, really encouraged us to share different parts of ourselves. Obviously, we're not doing anything like a method, but in terms of connecting to the piece, in terms of creating this shared dialogue and community about loss, has just been really amazing and has revealed so many things to me of like, oh, wait, I am this character, or part of me is this character. And I think that's been really beautiful for not only me, but for, I hope, everyone else who's involved.
Here's an interesting thing. The amount of tropes that you have in this in terms of horror films, when we're talking about teenage girls, name me a horror film in the last 30 years that did not have a teenage girl somewhere in it, to the point of the horror trope of the final girl, the one that survives at the end. But there's so many of them there. There is the trope of the funeral or the lost loved one. We see that all the time. You have another interesting trope of horror film here. The otherworldly creature comes out of something, pardon me, it's a roadkill creature?
It is a roadkill creature. I'll describe it a little more if you'd like.
Thank you.
Like,
See what I
and
thought. No, I'll say so. I grew up partially in South Carolina and partially in Pennsylvania. And I was always really interested in Southern folklore and Appalachian folklore, and sort of discovered this creature called the jackalope, which is this Appalachian mythological creature that is half jackrabbit, half antelope, or is like a rabbit with horns, essentially. And I was so fascinated by like, what if you, it's one thing to see a mythological creature, but what if you were walking by the road and saw it dead? What does that do to you? What would that mean? Like if I was walking down the road and saw like a baby dragon dead, what would I do with myself? And I thought that was such a fascinating idea. Um, and then I pushed it one step further, which is what if you find this creature, and then go to your house and find your father has died? Then what do you do? So just pushing the limits to the scenario to the extreme a bit. But I was so fascinated by this piece of folklore, by mythological creatures, by how we project onto animals, and I just think that it was very cool. I love horror movies about animals. One of the first horror movies I ever loved was Jaws. And then I went on a huge, like, the giant animals eating people movie streak and loved that. The creature in our piece, is small. He couldn't eat someone, but is still impactful nonetheless. But yeah, I wanted to play with magic, with what happens when magic dies, what happens when youth dies. What is all of this? What would all of this do? And I just threw it out on the page, and we're figuring it out.
So
And
there's yet another horror trope. I'm sorry, you were going to say.
I was gonna add a very important thing, that the creature then becomes really a point of connection with the main character Faye, with spirituality and what is holy. And I think that's one of the most beautiful and powerful parts of it, is that she builds this relationship, and then she wants to kind of share and bring her friends into that, and it's a piece of roadkill, but it is holy. And that's the role that it's playing there.
What did you say the character's name was?
Agnes.
Wait,
No.
which character?
Creature?
The girl
No,
or the creature?
Is it Faye?
Faye, yeah.
Faye.
I have this theory that there are no accidents, that the subconscious rules us in every moment. When you created the character and you created that name, Faye is one of the words that they use for otherworldly creatures.
Mm.
The ancient fairies were called the Fae. Did that come into your mind when you wrote that name out, or was it just, like I said, there?
I think it was one of those, I think it was a happy accident actually of I think originally this name kind of had been percolating in my mind for a while, and then I had realized that it was, a homophone for the Spanish word for faith, and that was very interesting to me. And then realized it's a different spelling. It's Faye rather than Fae. But I think during research when I was trying to pick between different names, realized, oh yes, this is the mythological fairy in the woods, and primarily I think British and French, um, folklore, but also I'm sure other places, and that was very exciting to me too.
All right, I'm gonna end with a spiritual question on this.
Mm.
Um, uh, there's something called the Great All that they talk about in spirituality, where an idea just lives in the air and comes down into people's brains. That's why you might see something happen. They talk about it all the time when there's monuments. You'll see a pyramid in Egypt. You'll see a pyramid in Mexico. You'll see a pyramid in all these places, as if a thought pattern emerged at the same time. Now, when I mentioned to you that this sounds like the giallo horror films of Italy, Mario Bava and Dario Argento, you didn't know their work at that point. Now, considering the way you're talking about doing horror on stage, the physicality, the dance, the comedy, the movement, that goes back to the 1890s for Théâtre du Grand Guignol, which was the French theater of horror, where they did exactly that. They had special effects. They did it in an ancient church, and so audiences would faint and gasp and scream because these murders were right there on stage. Were you aware of the Grand Guignol? We even use that when we say the Grand Guignol now, we're talking about bloody horror movies. But did you know their history? Did you know the Grand Guignol?
Not particularly. I studied primarily American and German theater in school, but there was an idea once at some point in the production history of this, I had an idea of like, I want to raise money and rent an abandoned church or a church and perform this in it. So that's kind of amazing to hear.
So I ask you all this question then. For all of you, are you horror movie lovers? We know, Abigail, you're a horror movie lover now. How about all of you? Are you horror movie lovers?
Not particularly.
I'm super scared of horror movies. Like, I appreciate them when they're good movies, but
Yeah.
I will not sleep for a month.
Same. Or I will be like this half of the time.
I growing up with an older brother, a significantly older brother, I had to like horror movies if I wanted to be in his presence. So I definitely grew up watching a lot and be like, watch this, and I'd be like, ah, and he'd be like, eh. And then would be like, can I sleep with you tonight? But I think, yeah, I also really like this sort of, I don't know if any of y'all have seen like It Follows recently.
Brilliant movie.
Right. And it's
Love
like
that movie.
different kind of horror that there's no like jump scares. There's no like, which is really what, yeah. But it's more of like, oh my God. And it's treating like themes that are so important and relevant in such a cool and fresh way. And I feel like I'm much more drawn to that than to the like, but I love The Conjuring and stuff, but I feel like that's definitely where I'm drawn to more.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It sounds like I'm gonna like this film.
Yes.
I'm definitely a fan of psychological horror, so like Midsummer, or any horror that feels real, that feels like this could actually happen. We're not scared of a creature that doesn't exist. It's things that exist, and that's how, again, just coming back to Blood Orange, is just like how it makes something that might not be believable if I tell you now actually completely believable, and how that relationship becomes so relatable. So I think I love those kinds of horrors.
That's my favorite moment in any horror film. where the person says, no, there's no such thing as, and there they are right in front of them. Love that. So all of you are not, and you're in good company, by the way. Boris Karloff's daughter, Sarah Karloff. Boris Karloff is probably the most famous horror film actor ever. And I interviewed his daughter at one point, and I kept talking about Frankenstein and all of this, and she finally stopped me and said, I don't like horror movies. I never watched my father's films. You're not going to get me to like horror movies. So you're in good company. So that's so I go back to my question about the Great All. You have elements of the Grand Guignol. You have elements of these giallo films. You have ancient myths and mythology. You have all of this in here, and it seems accidental. Even this company, the fact that you're all psychically linked enough that you could play each other's role. What's my question? Do you think there is something more? Do you think that it's not just practice making perfect, that you really have to be connected to really do fine work?
I think we're actually starting our own religion. So stay tuned.
Yes. Now that you say it, yeah,
Yeah.
we are a cult ultimately.
Sounds
No,
good to me.
I think
Last thing, say to the audience what why they should go. Why should they go to see Blood Orange? Madam Playwright, let's start with you.
I think that audience should go to see Blood Orange because more likely than not, they will laugh, they might shed a tear, and they will gasp and think about it on their subway ride, walk, or bus home.
I think people should watch Blood Orange because it's going to be nothing like they've ever seen before. It's, yes.
I was thinking when you were saying, Jay, about like people fainting and how that doesn't seem to happen anymore at the theater. Like people used to faint at the theater. I'm not saying that, but it just like maybe if people are looking for that kind of experience, this is like one of the closest experience they might get to that, of like that intensity of like, I can't do anything else besides faint right now. So
If you want to faint.
Yeah, it will be a very intense experience to every direction. It will be funny, it will be sad, it will be disturbing, and
I think you will be able to look at grief from a bit of a different point of view.
Well, you convinced me. I don't have to sell it anymore. I just have to, and that'll be that. Really wonderful. Ladies, please introduce yourself because it just says Et Alia down there. We want to make sure everybody knows who you are.
Okay, I am Georgia Valenti.
I'm Anna Moyoli.
I'm Maria Mueller.
I'm Louisa Galati. And we are Et Alia Theater.
And you've been around for 6 years, and that's wonderful. May you be around for another 60 years.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really excellent, really compelling piece. Looking forward to it. I'll put on my best horror movie t-shirt and go and see it. No, I'm going
Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you so much. All the best. This has been wonderful. Looking forward to the show.
So much.
Go on further.
Press the
Tell
ribbon.
us when and where. Somebody tell us when and where. So if anyone's watching this with a pen in their hand, they can write down exactly how to get there.
A.R.T. New York's Jeffrey and Paula Gural Theater. That's on West 53rd Street. You can get there the E train and then you walk. And we open on September 13th and we run until September 27th.
And if you want to catch a preview, there are a few preview performances that you can check out.
And so they should come several times because the rotating cast.
True. They should.
We didn't say you said it.
So yeah, if they want to deepen their flavor in, they have to come in multiple times.
Exquisite, exquisite. Thank you all so much. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ciao.